So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of constitutional law. This week, we start to look at some of the heads of power that are set out in the Constitution. These are the parts of the Constitution that grant the Commonwealth Parliament lawmaking powers. So, really important, and I think economic powers are a good place to start because they the three powers that we look at this week, so corporations, tax, and customs and excise, they give a broad sense of the different ways in which the Commonwealth government can both directly and indirectly exert lawmaking power and influence. So it's a broad sweep of the things that the Commonwealth government can do, and I think for that reason it's a really interesting place to start. Before we get underway with our discussion of that topic, two bits of housekeeping. The first being your first assessment task will be released on Moodle on Friday morning. So you'll be able to download the task under the Assessment 1 tab. You'll be able to do a fair chunk of that assessment based on the content that we've covered so far. There are some elements of the assignment that rely on week 4 content. So if you really want to get stuck in over the weekend, you might have to read ahead a little bit. But otherwise, there'll be a bit of week 4 stuff that you'll be relying on as well to complete the whole assessment. But from the moment it's released, and with the knowledge that you've got so far in your studies, there'll be plenty that you can do to start planning out and drafting up an answer. Then next week, week 4, as I mentioned last week, Tuesday of week 4 is census date. That's the last date to unenroll from the unit without incurring fees. After census date, so next Wednesday, I'll do the random allocations of your partners for the second assessment task. That's an automated random system that's done via Moodle. And then from there, I'll release the second task as well. And so you and your partner will be able to jump on that one too. So a bit of assessment coming up relatively quickly and relatively rapidly. And even if you've got a fair bit of time to complete both tasks, you've got slightly under a month to complete the first task, and then a bit longer to complete the second one. But I really do encourage you to get stuck in and make an attempt early. You're far better off having a go and giving yourself plenty of time to refine your thinking, refine your answer, and edit your response, rather than leaving it until the last minute and in a mad dash trying to figure out a response to make and figure out what on earth's going on. So I very much do recommend getting started early. And then the group task as well, we can talk about that in a little bit more detail next week. But because it's something that is done in pairs, I think that it's good courtesy to, again, reach out to your partner early and just have a conversation about what your time commitments are, what your expectations are. If you're the type of person who, would really you work during the days and you study in the evenings, let your partner know that. If you're someone who's got family responsibilities and you can't do things on weekends, just let each other know. Just the best way to approach this task is to have a really open and honest conversation as early as possible about what's going on and how you'd like to approach the task, and all about sort of setting those expectations. That's really important. But we can talk about that second task in a bit more detail next week as well. The midterm task, or the first assessment task, is going to present you with a a scenario, a legal problem, and you'll have to develop a response to that question. And so the thing that's interesting about constitutional law that is maybe a little bit different from some of the other subjects that you might have studied already is that we're sort of dealing with the question at two levels rather than just one, in the sense that as a first step, we're trying to determine if the law itself is constitutionally valid, right? Is this something that the Commonwealth government has the power to make a law with respect to? And then as a second step, what are the practical applications and meanings for a particular hypothetical client, right? If this is a valid law, what does this mean for them? How does this apply to them? And if it's not a valid law, what does that mean? How does that apply to the client in the scenario? And if you contrast that with something like, say, some of the other first year subjects like criminal law, right? If you've got a scenario where someone might be an issue around murder, your focus is on have the elements of murder been established in terms of unlawful killing, intent, those sorts of things. You're not too worried about this higher level question of, is the criminal code constitutionally valid, right? Like, are the provisions for murder, that's sort of not in question most of the time, and certainly at undergraduate level study, that's not an issue. Same with something like torts. You're looking at have the elements of negligence been met in relation to a specific scenario, not is the Civil Liability Act constitutionally valid, right? And so when we're coming to constitutional law and when we're coming to these constitutional law problems, there's a bit of an extra step that you need to go through, and then you'll need to think about in relation to these hypothetical problems that we'll be working through in the tutorials and that you'll find yourself confronted with in the first assessment task. So for that reason, I've put together, we briefly went over it last week, this sort of answer planner that you can go through the legislation as a whole and specific elements of a piece of legislation in order to help you determine or work out is a particular law constitutionally valid or not. And then once you've done that, then you can be thinking about, okay, how does this apply to the particular client? So I'm just getting a note in the chat that you can't see it. Hopefully that's available now. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay in when things pop up. Can see it. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to be going through today, we'll work through the tutorial problem for this week, and then we will. So we'll start with the answer, and then we'll go through how you might do that in a particular, how you might craft that into an answer. Sorry, I'm just trying to read the chat as well. There seem to be some technical issues that some people are having, but I think the majority of people will be able to see the screen. So let's start with the scenario itself. And now mine, it's not showing up. Alrighty, hopefully you can all see the tutorial problem now rather than the planning screen. Is that right?
Yeah, we can see the.
Yep, Fantastic. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, so here we've got a scenario where Silver Linings is a charity that owns and operates a school for children with special needs in Biloela. They're incorporated. Note that down for later. And its stated objects include providing education to children with special needs and raising funds for the school through donations and investments. It charges parents a minimal fee. They also hold a small number of shares in a mining company that it has held for the past 10 years. They also have a little vegetable plot where they grow gardens for educational purposes. A local grocery store called Green Plus buys vegetables for school children, and it uses the money, the school uses the money that it earns from these sale of vegetables to improve the school facilities. The Commonwealth Parliament enacts the Grocery Price Stabilisation Act to deal with rising grocery prices, still relevant. Section 5 makes it an offence for a constitutional corporation to buy or sell grocery products above the rates fixed by regulation. And then Section 10 provides that the constitutional corporation that's found to be regularly contravening Section 5 is liable to be deregistered as a corporation. The Green Plus has a practice of paying more for school produce than market price because they want to help out the school. Silver Lining and Green Plus are prosecuted under Section 5 and 10 for a series of transactions where they bought quantities of tomatoes above the price fixed by the regulations. So Silver Lining and Green Plus have come to us for some advice. The way that we'll approach this, as a first sweep, I'll just get your initial reactions and thoughts. As you're reading through this scenario, what's immediately leaping out to you as interesting or particularly relevant? We'll note all that down. Then we'll work through the planner. Then we'll work through actually constructing this into a usable assessment answer, basically. So when you read through that scenario, what sorts of things immediately caught your eye as standing out, maybe being relevant, maybe reminded you of something that you encountered in the lecture materials? So the first point being that there seems to be some trade going on. That's a good start. We're thinking about WA Football League as being a potentially relevant and useful case. Yep.
I recall reading something about an educational corporation doesn't necessarily or isn't deemed to be a trading corporation if that's not their primary objective or something, or for the purpose of giving education.
Yep. That's good that there's a memory of that one. Yeah, we can make a note of that and revisit that as well. What else? So the money paid by the students' parents would likely be for services provided. So we're thinking about there's this element of this, I guess, school fees, and how do we factor that into everything that's going on? Yep, absolutely. What else? Financial corporation as well. I like it. Can you tell me a little bit more about where your thinking is at in relation to that one?
Not particularly.
No, that's so good.
I can, if you permit.
Yeah, of course.
Silver Lining is a financial corporation, because it is a corporation which engages in financial activities, investments, shares in a mining company.
Yeah.
To facilitate its primary function, charity.
Yep. So
even if those activities are facilitating the primary function, it is still a financial corporation.
Yep. So we're thinking about these investments and the shares in the mining company that they hold. How do we factor that into what's going on as well? Fantastic.
And just
yeah.
to add that Silver Lining and Green Plus are not foreign corporations. They are not formed outside the limits of the Commonwealth.
Yep, those are good points.
And at first sight, Silver Lining is not a trading corporation because buying and selling are not at the very heart of its activities. And its trading activities are not substantial, not insignificant insignificant part of its operations.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we're thinking about, yes, they're engaging in trade, but in the context of all their activities, is it substantial or not? Yep. I like that.
Yes, and the rationale for this is that fee partially covers the costs, and they have small number of shares and only occasionally sells vegetables.
Yep. So the language that we're given in the facts is all pointing to these being relatively minor ideas or minor elements of the activities that they're engaged in. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, but this was, excuse me, just if you permit to continue.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
But this was at first sight. On a closer look, it may be construed like a trading corporation on the basis that if there are no current activities, we need to look at its constitutional documents for objects for which it was established. So it's a kind of purpose test. And among those stated objects are investments. So this may be interpreted like a trading corporation.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the what was the sort of the constitution of the corporation rather than Commonwealth Constitution, and what was the corporation formed with the purpose of doing. And we'll revisit those ideas in our discussion, thinking about, yeah, how important is that, or how much weight do we put on what the stated objects are versus the activities that it currently engages in. All really good points. Anything that anyone else wanted to weigh in with?
I would add here about Green Plus that it is trading corporation. It is crystal clear that it is engaged in trading. This is the fact.
Yep. So while there might be some question marks over Silver Lining, we'd be pretty content that Green Plus is pretty clearly, they're a grocery store. That's their core business is trade. Yep. Question in the chat: are they considered a corporation yet? Is that in relation to Silver Lining or Green Plus in particular, or both of them?
Sorry, I got a little bit confused. I remembered that there was some sort of difference with like incorporated, but I just remembered that it means that they are not liable personally or whatever.
Yeah. So it's and the way in a scenario that you can tell if something is a corporation is whether the facts tell you that they're incorporated, or if the name of the company has the suffix Pty Ltd, which is short for proprietary limited, or LTD, which is just limited. That would mean that it's a publicly traded company. But Pty Ltd or LTD at the end, that indicates to you that this is a corporation. Then the step for us is to determine whether they're a constitutional corporation, in the sense that are they engaged in Are they a foreign corporation, or are they engaged in trading or financial activities? But yeah, a point of clarification, I suppose, in terms of how do you tell if we're dealing with corporations at all? The quick answer is those are the phrasings that you're looking for in a problem. The longer answer is you're looking for an entity that has separate legal personality, limited liability to shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. But really good question. Anything else that's jumping out to us as being potentially important that we think we should be covering? I think that's a really good start. So let's jump in and have a look at our planner and work through some ideas in relation to that. So our starting point, as I said at the start, needs to be, is this law constitutionally valid, right? Is the grocery price, GPS was the abbreviation, is the GPS Act constitutionally valid? Can Section 5 apply to trading and financial corporations? And can Section 10, do they have the power to deregister a corporation? So what you might do, you might sort of think about in general overall, and then you might think about specific sections that are of particular interest or relevance. And we talked last week about characterization, thinking about, okay, what is this law about? What is this a law with respect to? And so I'd like us to begin by thinking about this GPS Act and thinking about what is this, how would we characterize this law? And we can have more than one characterization. Remember last week we talked about dual and multiple characterization and things like that. So what would our starting point be here?
I think you have Section 51(2) and Section 90 of the Constitution, when Commonwealth Parliament may impose taxes, customs, or excise duties, but cannot impose state tax. In this case, I would think that this is the imposition of fixed rate, not taxation.
Right. Yeah, I think that you would be right as well to say that this is not, we're not dealing with tax or excise, most likely. Yeah. What are some of the things that the Act itself trying to do or achieve?
Threshold for the market.
Sorry, I missed the start of that answer while you were coming off mute there. And it looks like you might still just be on mute. Sorry.
Excuse me, to set a certain threshold for the market.
Yep. So putting a threshold or cap on grocery prices. Yep. So, you know, that's the stated aim of the Act, is to deal with these rising grocery prices. Is dealing with rising grocery prices something that's in the Constitution? No, it's not. So we know that even if this is what the law is about, in order to be constitutionally valid, we've got to find something else, another way of characterizing the law that would fit it within one of the heads of power. And so just thinking, I suppose, strategically about the economic powers that we've talked about in this week. We've already established that tax and excise are probably out. And so the only thing that's left is Section 51, paragraph 20, which is the corporation's power, which is that the Commonwealth can make laws with respect to corporations, specifically foreign trading or financial, right? And so in terms of characterization, if the Commonwealth wanted to justify or explain its ability to pass this law, it's got to fit it under one of these heads of power. What we're doing is we're looking to characterize this law as something that regulates the activity of trading and financial corporations. I think the wording of the Act is constitutional corporation, so it could cover foreign as well. Although for our purposes, we're really interested in the trading and financial aspects. But you see here what we're doing in sort of fleshing out this answer is we're thinking about how can we understand this law in a way that would bring it within Commonwealth power to pass it in the first place. And so it's really important that we're in this very first initial characterization step, thinking about the law in a way that will enable us to successfully identify which head of power or which heads of power are potentially relevant and applicable. So we've characterized the law as something to do with constitutional corporations. We know that that's Section 51, paragraph 20. What are some of the key tests and ideas from the lecture materials around what the Commonwealth has the power to do in relation to constitutional corporations, and also how do we identify what a constitutional corporation is? We did have some of those ideas popping up in our sort of first little brainstorming, so we should be able to identify those pretty quickly.
Using the purposive test.
Yeah, tell me more.
I've got in my notes the nature of the corporation and its purpose. That's what I have. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Did anyone else want to jump in?
I remember reading something about what they do predominantly.
Yep. So ideas around predominant or substantial activities.
Substantial and substantial or not insignificant part of their operations.
Yep. And so specifically thinking about trading and finance, we're wondering, is trade or finance a not insignificant part of what they're doing? Right. And so we've got some useful comments from the WA National Football League, from Chief Justice Barwick and Justice Mason as well, giving a pretty powerful judgment too. So Justice Mason identifying that it's this is a question of fact and degree, right? Where we're looking closely at the at what the corporation is doing, and it's there's a level of uncertainty or vagueness to a lot of the language that's being used in these tests in terms of, you know, what's substantial, what's not insignificant. We kind of roughly know what it means, but in terms of putting specifics on it, is it 10%? Is it 15%? It's impossible to narrow it down to that. But instead, what we're doing is we're looking at the particular circumstances of the particular business or corporation that's in front of us in terms of these facts. And that's where Justice Mason's coming from when he's saying it's a question of fact and degree. We've got to look at what we're being provided and make a judgment call based on what's in front of us. So it's a question of fact and degree. And that's from Justice Mason. And then Chief Justice Barwick as well in that case, really highlighting that the thing that's of most interest to us is the actual activities of the corporation rather than the purpose for which it was formed. We can look at the purpose to help guide us, but the most important thing is what are the activities, and is trading or finance a substantial part of that. So we're really looking at activities as the most important. Cool. So we know that the corporation's power is what's guiding us here. And we can, in terms of looking at the legislation itself, right? Section 5, which tries to, which identifies that constitutional corporations can't trade or buy and sell groceries above those fixed prices that are set out in the regulations. Because that's a restriction that's applying only to constitutional corporations, we're pretty happy that will fall within the power, because that's they're not trying to regulate or prescribe activities on non-constitutional corporations. So in terms of thinking about Section 5, we're not so much worried about these issues around what's the activity, but that will come back to that in terms of the applications to Silver Lining and to Green Plus. But in terms of determining whether the law itself is valid, we'd be happy that Section 5 deals with, and I'll just pull the exact wording, an offence for a constitutional corporation to buy or sell groceries. So here, because Section 5 is focused on only on constitutional corporations, we'd be happy that that's a law that pretty squarely fits into a law being with respect to a constitutional corporation. That's fine. Section 10, same thing, because Section 10 is sort of hinges on Section 5 in terms of it's a penalty for regularly contravening Section 5. It flows from the same source of power. So that's all good as well. In terms then of application, let's Let's do Green Plus first because it's simpler. Is Green Plus a constitutional corporation? And specifically, we're thinking about, is it trading or is it financial? We've said earlier that we're pretty confident that it will be a trading corporation. But in terms of developing an answer, we need to be more specific in identifying, okay, why is it? Why do we think it's a trading corporation?
Saying that they engaged in trade, they trade literally.
Yep. Yeah, it's a that one's not a trick question. It's as simple as they're a grocer or a supermarket.
Forms a significant part of their daily business.
Yeah, their primary or probably even sole activity is buying and selling goods. And so that pretty clearly falls within the definition of trade. And it's certainly a not insignificant it's not insignificant part of the business. In fact, it's probably the most significant part of their business is actually buying and selling groceries for people. So that's okay. I'm just going to quickly catch up in the chat. There seem to be it trades exclusively in local district. That's a really great point. And here's where the corporation's power is really interesting, right? So one of the other heads of power that the Commonwealth has is to make laws with respect to interstate trade and commerce. So trade and commerce between different jurisdictions. And as time has gone on, that power itself has been interpreted more expansively. But the Commonwealth government under the Constitution wouldn't have the power to regulate or restrict the purely intrastate, so within Queensland in this instance, trade and commerce of an entity under the trade and commerce power. However, because the corporation's power has been interpreted so expansively and because the Commonwealth government can make laws with respect to constitutional corporations, this has sort of given them almost a little bit of a backdoor to regulate the trading activities, the intrastate trading activities of a constitutional corporation by doing it through the corporation's power rather than through the trade and commerce power. So really great attention to detail and pick up that the trade itself is locked within a particular jurisdiction, but because the corporation's power is so expansive, it's not an issue, and it's something that that would still be able to be applied in this instance. So Green Plus, this is, we're pretty happy that this is a trading, it's substantial activity is trade, and therefore that would be a constitutional corporation. What about silver linings? We've talked in our sort of brainstorming around trade potentially being an issue, and then also the finance potentially being an issue. So we know in terms of trade itself, And now it's not letting me do a sub bullet point. What's the trade that's going on? They're, let's call it small scale vegetable production and sale. And the funds are used for educational purposes. Now, the key question for us here, and as Justin Mason tells us, is one of fact and degree. Do we think that this trade is a not insignificant part of what Silver Linings is doing?
It's pretty insignificant.
Okay. And what leads you to think that?
I guess the main reason they're doing it is for education. And it's only occasionally buying vegetables. It's not regularly as well.
Yep. Okay. So the wording and the facts around is important as well. Yep. What else? Agreement,
Also,
disagreement?
Sorry, also fee partially covers their costs.
Okay, so in terms of their overall expenses, they've got a fee. Yep.
But that fee would relate more to finance, wouldn't it, than trading?
I think there's an argument for that. The reason
Would it also,
sorry, go ahead.
Jake. Would it also depend on whether they're actually a registered charity? Because there's some, like in Queensland, there's organisations that are incorporated under the Office of Fair Trading in Queensland, but they're also registered federally under the Australian Charities Commission.
Yep. And so I guess that question becomes relevant when we're thinking about, a charity can't make a profit. And so whether we think that that's, whether that's something that is, leads us down the path of whether they're engaging in trade or not. The thing that's difficult about that is that it's coming back to this distinction between ideas around this purposive test and what's the purpose of the corporation versus the preferred test, which focuses on what is the corporation actually doing, right? So I think you're right to be thinking about, okay, well, they're a charity. That means they're not looking to make profit. They're not in it as a business per se. But that doesn't necessarily stop them from engaging in trade or financial activity.
Right.
But it's a good point. Just catching up on the chat as well. So I think it depends on how much they rely on the income for trade and school resources. And could you mention if trading is so slight or incidental? Right. So we're all doing a great job of honing in on this issue of how much does this trade, this selling the vegetables, how much does this matter to the overall activity of the school? And it's something that we can we maybe don't have quite enough facts to say with 100% certainty, but we've definitely got enough here to make a good argument of it. And in particular, as you've all been pointed out, this is something that is only occasional. It's something that sort of supplements its income, but seems like it's not something that it necessarily relies on week in, week out to have this income. And these are facts that would push us towards an argument that it doesn't meet this threshold of trade being a not insignificant activity. We could fairly say that it's an insignificant part of its business. If you wanted to make the argument, and this is a point that sort of goes to assessment more broadly, if you wanted to make the argument that you think that it is significant or forms a not insignificant part of its activities, I would be open to that too. I think that you could make the argument that, look, it's part of what they're doing. It's clearly established enough that they're doing it, even if it's only occasional. It's something that they've obviously got a relationship with Green Plus, which means that they must be doing it with some regularity. It's a part of what the school does. And so even if it's a small part of what they're doing, it's not insignificant. I'd be open to that argument as well. What is the most important thing in terms of an assessment answer is the way that you argue the case, basically. So the way that you, as long as you're skillfully, for one, drawing on the relevant law and tests, and two, bringing in the facts and discussing how they support your argument or interpretation, that's what I'm most focused on, or what's most important, rather than necessarily worrying about, okay, well, did you say it was insignificant or not? Whether you say it is insignificant or not matters for the conclusion that you reach, and making sure that your conclusion is consistent with the way that you've interpreted things. But whether you think it's insignificant or not is less important. Does that make sense? Okay, so the audio, I might have frozen up a little bit there. And so the gist of what I'm saying is that what you argue is less important than the way that you argue it. As long as you're identifying all the relevant tests and cases, and as long as you're making use of the facts in the scenario to support your argument, that's more important than necessarily was it significant or insignificant. Does that make sense? Yep, fantastic. Tash.
Excuse me, shall we include here the small percentage, the small shareholding in a mining company, but for a considerable period of time, for 10 years?
Yep. Well, so that'll be the next thing is if we think it's financial or not is a separate question to whether we think it's trading or not. So yeah, we'll come to that now. But before we do that, Tash, you had a question.
Yeah, I think my question will probably be answered when we move on to finance, because it was about the funds that are coming into the charity. So I think we'll probably touch on it in the next part.
Okay, right. Fantastic. So finance. And the key thing that we've really identified here is this shareholding. Where in the mining company for a long time, and this is really useful and really important to have have touched on is that in comparison to the sale of the vegetables, which for one, I don't think we get told how long that's been going on for, but we certainly get told that it's, you know, not something that is necessarily consistent, the phrasing around occasionally and things like that. Whereas we can compare that to the shareholding, which is of an ongoing nature. And even though we don't get told that it's quite how much of the revenue it comprises, it's something that has this really important, consistent pattern to it. And so I think that regardless of whether we thought that the trade was not insignificant, I think we'd have a much stronger argument in this instance that that shareholding is not insignificant. It's important to the activities of the school because it's this really valuable revenue stream that's keeping them in business. That's enabling them to keep going with the services that they're providing. But I am open to counter arguments if anyone cares to make them.
I would add here that one of the purposes of the business, and obviously it is in the constitutional documents, is investments.
Yep. So that's something that you know, it's less important to this question than the activities test, but it's something that helps support our argument as well, right? Or the argument. I guess if we're silver linings, we're trying as hard as we can to argue that none of it applies. But if it's both a substantial activity and something that's included in the purpose for the corporation, then regardless of sort of which test we're looking at, it seems to indicate that this shareholding and investment, these financial aspects of the company are important to it.
Can I just ask a question whether it is even necessary to talk here about substantiality or non-substantiality when we're trying to qualify it as a finance corporation? Because I think that should be covered by another case when corporation which engages in its financial activities to facilitate only its primary function is still a financial corporation. And
Can I ask a question, Jacob?
Yeah, sorry. My computer froze when I tried to swap tabs to pull up the study guide. I wanted to pull up a quote from State Superannuation, but I so I lost the end of Vladislav's comment. So I just very briefly get you to repeat sort of the second half of your comment, and then Shio, I can go to you.
Yes, definitely. So this is a corporation which engages in financial activities to facilitate its primary function, and the primary function is charity. And even if those financial activities are small, it is still a financial corporation. And the case for this is State Superannuation Board and Trade Practices Commission.
Yep. So there was still discussion in that case around some of the ideas from trade or the ideas around whether a corporation is a trading corporation or not, and these ideas around substance and not insignificant being relevant to the discussions around finance as well. But I think you're very right to invoke State Superannuation Board in this context as well. Absolutely. Shia, what did you want to ask?
Yeah, so would it be necessary to review their constitution in working out the purpose of the organisation? But in saying that, there's not enough information in there to ascertain how much of their trading income is, or how much of the income is made up through trading. And if you read Mason and what Mason said at 33 in the West Australian NFL, not every corporation which is engaged in trading activity is a trading corporation. He goes on to talk about churches and schools. And his final sentence in that paragraph was whether the trading activities of a particular corporation are sufficient to warrant its being characterised as a trading corporation is very much a question of fact and degree. So without the information, the information about how, what percentage of income is made through their trading, it'd be hard to kind of give them advice about it, wouldn't it?
Well, and so that's part of what our discussion here has been, does relate to this, and in particular this idea about this is a question of fact and degree. It's going to depend on the particular facts and circumstances of each case or each hypothetical scenario that's in front of us. Where the discussion has gone is that in terms of the trade, the vegetable production is something that I think you could, the stronger argument is that it's because it's only occasional, it's small in scale. I think you could make a pretty compelling argument that it's not a significant activity for the school. The difference to the shareholding, even though we're still not necessarily told quite how much it is in the revenue stream, the fact that it's been going on for 10 years, that longevity, that consistency lends a degree of importance and significance to it that arguably isn't there with the vegetable side of things. So that's where we're sort of drawing a distinction here, is that where the trading side of things is probably a bit more arguable that significance isn't there. The shareholding in the mining company is a more core to what they've been doing for a longer period of time. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
You froze halfway through that though, Jacob.
Sorry, everyone. I don't know what's been happening with the computer today. Basically, the distinction being the trade is, I think you could make a pretty good argument that the trade is insignificant, whereas the finance, even though we're not told exactly how much of the revenue stream comes from these investments, the longevity of it, the fact that it's outlined as being core to what the charity's doing, those all lend themselves to an argument that it is not insignificant, or it's a substantial part of what they're doing. Just quickly racing through, in terms of the legal effect, because we've said that Green Plus is a trading corporation, that means that Section 5 will apply to Green Plus. And the practical effect is they shouldn't be selling above market rates, which also means that Section 10 will apply. And the practical effect is that they can potentially be deregistered as a result of Section 10. In terms of silver linings, it's a little bit more arguable, but potentially they're a trading corporation, in which case, same thing, Section 5 and 10 will apply, and they're at risk of being deregistered as well. Or you argue that they're not a trading corporation, but the financial elements, I think, probably still are going to be an issue, and they're more likely to be found to be a financial corporation, in which case, same thing. They're a constitutional corporation. That means that Section 5 applies, and that means that Section 10 applies, and they'll be at risk of deregistration. Tash, did we manage to get to answer your question or not?
Kind of, but we haven't really backed it up. But when we talk about them being a charity and that a big part of their objective is raising funds, does that also fall under the finance section? Not just that they have shares, but they would have a continual amount of money coming in, which does that classify as dealing in financial business?
As in terms of sort of general fundraising activities?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you could make the reasonable argument. Again, I'm going to stop the share in the hopes that my computer doesn't freeze up quite so much, and quickly race you through, because I'm conscious of the time, to State Superannuation Board, and in particular, so noting it at 19, the court's approach to what constitutes a financial corporation should be the same as its approach to a trading corporation. So thinking about these ideas around a substance being important to both. And these are terms of, at 25, it's not a term of art, nor does it have a special or settled legal meaning. They do no more than describe a corporation which engages in financial activities or perhaps is intended to do so. And so what's important and useful about those little snippets is that they leave it open to us to make arguments in relation to a particular set of activities. So, the idea that the charity bringing in funds, fundraising, those sorts of ideas, I think we could probably quite properly characterize those as dealing in finance, and as a result could be held that this is a financial corporation. I think that would be a reasonable argument. Excellent. So great work, everyone. It's a big thing to work through a constitutional law problem like this. But I think it's well worth spending the time sort of going through, mapping out what are the different sections saying, are they constitutionally valid, how might they apply, and really taking the time to do that thoroughly, because once you've got the answer mapped out like that, translating it into a written response becomes a much easier process. And so next week, we're dealing with another set of powers, the external affairs powers and defense powers, so a sort of an international theme. And so what we'll do with next week's tutorial, we'll go through a similar process, but a more condensed, we'll try and keep it a bit tighter, and then we'll work through how do we take that plan and turn that into a written response that thoroughly engages with all the issues. Great work, everyone. Quick question in the chat. Could you argue that Green Plus are paying the regulated amount and donating the rest? I think we'd need a bit more clarity on the financials and the financial side of things. It's a really interesting and creative argument, though. I like it. I don't think that we've got the facts to sustain it, but yeah, really, really great way to think outside the box. We will leave it there. Thank you all very much for coming along. Make sure you're checking Moodle on Friday morning for the first assessment task to be released. And I'll see you all next week to talk about international powers. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.